The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Iron Stark, and today I'll be showcasing a build centered around the Claymore, my favorite infusible greatsword in Elden Ring, and one of the most iconic legacy weapons in From Software's catalog. This video is all about taking this weapon and making it terrifyingly OP in a very straightforward and approachable way that any player at any skill level can use effectively. To begin, the Claymore shares the same light attack chain as most greatswords in Elden Ring, but what distinguishes this beauty of a sword from the rest of the pack is its heavy attacks are piercing poke attacks. What makes these poke attacks so good is pierce damage is one of the least resisted damage types in Elden Ring, so these heavy attacks will hit especially hard. On top of that, with all the buffs greatswords have had across several patches, increasing the speed of their heavy attacks, both the uncharged and charged heavy attacks come out very comfortably. The Claymore's heavy attacks are an absolute cornerstone of this build, and if you're going to use the Claymore in any capacity with any build, you should be using them. This build utilizes two Ashes of War that are available at the very beginning of the game, are extremely powerful, and have only become more powerful with Talismans added in Shadow of Erdtree. The first Ash of War this build uses is Impaling Thrust, a piercing attack where the player lunges forward with a quick stab. What makes Impaling Thrust so powerful is how fast it comes out, combined with the fact that it does 33 stance damage with a greatsword. For context, everyone's favorite Ash to throw on Morgott's greatsword, Lion's Claw, does 36 stance damage. Impaling Thrust on a Claymore does only 3 less stance damage, but it comes out decently faster, and that's only the beginning of how powerful it is. Impaling Thrust can be easily followed up with one of the Claymore's signature pierce attacks. An uncharged heavy attack does a 14.5 stance damage, whereas a charged heavy attack does 36 stance damage, meaning that when comboed with Impaling Thrust into a Claymore heavy attack, you will deal 50.5 to 72 stance damage in a near instant, and that's before considering things like the Stonebarb Cracked Tear. Both Impaling Thrust and the Claymore heavy attacks deal pierce damage, so they will have very high raw damage as well, and with the Blade of Mercy talisman, you will get a 20% attack power boost for 20 seconds after landing a critical hit, which will happen constantly because this setup is a stance-breaking monster. The second Ash of War this build uses is Stormblade, a weapon skill where the player slashes at the air, launching a wind projectile and can be used successively. While Stormblade is a very good ranged option, it really shines at point-blank range. This is because it has a hitbox on both the weapon and the wind projectile. Because of how fast Stormblade can be used in succession, it can easily trigger the successive hit buffs from Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and the Thorny Cracked Tear. Then combine that with the Enraged Divine Beast talisman, and each swing from Stormblade will deal 10% more damage. Regardless if you favor Impaling Thrust or Stormblade, both setups are very comfortable and can be extremely powerful on the Claymore, and will annihilate all bosses in their wake. especially if you build around them. The primary stats of this build are 60 strength for weapon scaling, as this build runs the heavy affinity, 13 dexterity to meet the requirements of the Claymore, 18 mind, since this build is very weapon skill centric, 33 faith for buffs, and 30 endurance because that's pretty much my gold standard for having free movement and the ability to wear pretty much whatever armor I want. Speaking of armor, this build brings Fashion Souls in full force. I'm wearing the Knight's Cavalry helm and gauntlets, Gravebird Black Quill armor, and the Greaves of Solitude. This is one of my favorite looks, but it's worth mentioning that the Black Quill armor is basically a 5th talisman because it increases the power of jump attacks by 10%. The talismans for this build will vary slightly depending on if you're using Impaling Thrust or Stormblade. Shard of Alexander increases the power of weapon skills by 15%. In the case of using Stormblade, you can stack this with the Enraged Divine Beast talisman, which increases the power of storm-based skills by 10%. The Two-Handed Sword talisman increases the power of all two-handed attacks by 15%, and stacks with the Axe talisman, which increases the power of charged heavy attacks by 10%. I also used the Blade of Mercy talisman often when using Impaling Thrust, to increase attack power by 20% for 20 seconds after landing a critical hit, and as I mentioned before, Impaling Thrust on a Claymore can do 50 to 72 stance damage in a blink of an eye when comboing Impaling Thrust with a heavy attack, so stance breaks are inevitable. Rotten Wing Sword Insignia did get some flexing in because, as I mentioned, Stormblade swings really fast, and if you're using it at point-blank range, where this weapon is connecting, you will trigger its successive hit buffs fairly easily. Lastly, the Old Lord's Talisman was occasionally flexed in to increase spell duration because I am insistent on making Black Flame Blade work, dammit. As for buffs, this is what makes this build disgustingly, absolutely diabolically powerful for such a simple build. My bread and butter for hyper buffing are Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri to increase attack power by 15 and 25% respectively. You could also substitute Howl of Shabriri for Flame Grant Me Strength if the 30% damage debuff of Howl is too severe for your liking. So, you start off fights with over 45% more base power because Golden Vow and Howl of Shabriri stack multiplicatively, and then if you get a stance break off after landing a critical attack in the first 40 seconds of a fight, which is likely, you will get buffed by another 20% by the Blade of Mercy, and the footage frankly speaks for itself and reflects how powerful this build is. Most bosses don't last a minute and a half against this build. For Physick, I ran the Stonebarb Cracked tier to all but guarantee a fast stance break, and the Spiked Cracked tier for more potent charged heavy attacks. Occasionally I flexed in the Thorny Cracked tier when using Stormblade for an additional successive hit buff. All footage for this build was captured during the 1.16 patch and in New Game Plus. I truly had a lot of fun with this build, because in a game where swords can shoot magic beams and erupt fire from the earth, spears that can stab the body of a goddess, and katanas that bleed eternal, one of the mightiest things you can wield is this beautifully simple sword, and hit them really hard. Enjoy the showcase, everyone.
Well, thou art of passing skill. Warrior blood must truly run in thy veins. Tarnished. that is golden. And one day, we'll return together.
have it stolen from me again.
You're a fool!